Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Marky J. Some of you know me as Judge Johnson. I'm here with Mikey B. Most of week 6 is in the books now. I'd say all of it is because I really don't care about the Colts versus the Titans. I'm not sure about all of you. As many of you now know, you can find my blog over at fantasyfirmblog.wordpress.com, and I'm on Twitter at MJFantasySports.
Hey guys, nice to be with you. Mikey B here, and just so you guys know, this is being brought to you by the new product Donut Shoes, and so we'll have more on that coming up.
Look forward to it.
So Mark, a couple big surprises this week. A lot of injuries, lots of craziness. What comes to mind for you?
Well, I'm really looking forward to this week's article, actually. I've got a little story for everyone, and I think this week just goes to show that on any given Sunday, anything can happen. Football and fantasy football, they make a fickle mistress. This week, I think the biggest surprises outside of injury were really the kind of boiled down to games. None bigger than last night's upset of the Giants over the Broncos. Who would have figured that a team that loses 3 of its starting wide receivers, by far its most explosive offensive player, one of its starting cornerbacks leaves the team, is suspended, and they're going up against one of the toughest defenses in the NFL on the road, and they win 23-10? I mean, you kidding me with that? That to me was the number one surprise. That was my number one pick in Survivor / Eliminator pools. The Texans were my number 2. Wish I'd have gone with them. The New York Jets hanging around with the New England Patriots yesterday, and then the Miami Dolphins get shut out 17-0 in the first half, and then they win the game 20-17 against the team that, defending NFC champions.
Yeah, apart from injuries, it was a rough week for Survivor, I would say. I think for me, the 2 most popular picks were Denver and Atlanta. In both, I think Atlanta just totally melted down, but Denver didn't even show up.
Fill the hole. Wear donut shoes now.
All right, let's look ahead to week 7. A few guys with some good matchups. Again, there's a bunch of buys going on, some injuries we'll talk about. So, who are some guys that have some good matchups? Maybe they're obvious, maybe they're not.
Let's start off with quarterbacks. I'm going to fly through these, and obviously feel free to reach out to me on Twitter if you have any questions for lineup decisions, or reach out to me on my blog. Quarterbacks for me, Matt Ryan. He's had a pretty challenging season thus far. He's really not given you much after following up on his MVP season. But New England is giving up the most points to opposing quarterbacks. They helped get Deshaun Watson going. Then they helped get Cam Newton going. I estimate that they also helped Matt Ryan get going. And so he, for me, is a quarterback that is probably going to be lowly valued this week going into week 7, but he's a guy I like to put up big points. Sliding right into wide receivers, I just mentioned Matt Ryan. Well, Julio Jones is another guy who has just been really disappointing. We'll touch more on him later, but he's only seen 1 red zone target the entire season. I couldn't even believe it when I heard that.
I'm a Julio Jones owner, and it's just couldn't be more frustrating to use I think I was top 5 pick on this guy who has all the talent in the world, and they just refuse to feed him the ball. I don't understand.
It makes absolutely no sense. And obviously, as an owner of Julio Jones, you understand, he's not giving you top 5 value. People were saying this week that, he finally gave you something, but not nearly enough to warrant where he went. So hold on, though. I think he turns it around, and it starts here. I think that Julio Jones has a Julio game. So be careful. Don't sell him low. I'm going to talk more about that later. Dez Bryant. This is a little bit of a gut call. He's going up against the 49ers, but I really like him to go off here. He's seen consistent targets, building rapport, coming off a bye. Really like him, but I think this is the week where you see Terrell Pryor and Jamison Crowder give you something. The Eagles are giving up the 2nd most points to opposing wide receivers. It's really their cornerbacks that are lackluster. So for me, that's Terrell Pryor working the outside. I think this is the week that Terrell Pryor gives you something.
Yeah, I'm with all of those. I like Kirk Cousins as well, just for that fact. What about running backs?
Running backs, we just talked about the Falcons, but come on. You've got the New England Patriots. I don't care what you tell me. They are just at the bottom of the barrel with defenses in the NFL. They really almost let the Jets take it away from them. they're giving up the second most points to opposing running backs. And so Devontae Freeman of the Atlanta Falcons, for me, is a surefire top-end RB1. Leonard Fournette had a bit of an ankle scare, so you really want to pay attention to RotoWorld for anything updating you on his injury status. But the Colts are giving up the 10th most points to opposing running backs. To me, Leonard Fournette is pretty much matchup proof at this point. And so if he's healthy and he's a go, I'm expecting, again, from him, top-end RB1 numbers. I mean, what's it now? 2 weeks in a row, he's given you a 75-plus or more touchdown run. This time it was the first run from the line of scrimmage. And then Jay Ajayi. Nobody expected him to do what he did this past weekend against the Falcons, who have a pretty good rush defense so far on the season. Now he's getting the Jets. They're giving up the fourth most points to opposing running backs. It looks like he's finally getting going. Jay Ajayi, give him to me. I think he's going to finish with top 5 numbers this week.
Well, let's move on to bye week strategy. Who do you need to drop this week in order to make some moves?
This is a tough one because the only 2 teams we're really worried about here being on bye are you got the Lions and you've got the Texans. So you're not dropping DeAndre Hopkins. You're not dropping Marvin Jones after what he just did, even though if he hadn't, I might have been considering his name. And you're not dropping Golden Tate, even though it looks like he might be dealing with an injury. Obviously, we'll update this if he, if he turns out that injury turns out to be more severe. We'll look at him as a possible sell. I don't think you could ever consider dropping someone of that caliber. So, really, for me, on the Lions side of the ball, it's Amir Abdullah and Theo Riddick. And I can't believe I'm saying this because I'm so high on Amir Abdullah. But Amir Abdullah is not a drop. Obviously, you've drafted him too high. So for me, the only reason I mention him is I think he's a guy that if you need room, you absolutely need room. Try packaging him with someone else and making a deal. Theo Riddick, on the other hand, unless you're in one of the deepest PPR leagues, I think that Theo Riddick is kind of at a point where he can go. He's just not being utilized like many thought he would be. D'Onta Foreman, moving to the Texans, you're not, like I said, you're not dropping Nuke Hopkins, you're not dropping Will Fuller now. So you look to the running backs. Obviously, Lamar Miller is a guy who you're going to keep rolling out there. Unless you own Lamar Miller, drop D'Onta Foreman. He's just not a guy who's giving you enough value to hold him unless he's a handcuff for you. And then Matthew Stafford, going back to the Lions, he came off kind of an unlikely good game fantasy-wise because of what the craziness that happened in the end of the game. For me, he's not giving you a consistent enough fantasy production, so I might look to trade him if you can.
Gotta have him. Just gotta.
We got a couple questions from some loyal fans that we're getting, so that's very always appreciated. So thanks, guys. This one comes from Todd Samuelson of Roanoke, Virginia. With Aaron Rodgers now possibly out for the season, should I pick up Brett Hundley? And we should clarify it's Monday evening right now, and I don't believe that we know for a fact that Aaron Rodgers is out for the season. Do we yet?
We know for almost certain that he is. Actually, it was just reported. We just found this out, but it was just reported that Aaron Rodgers will require surgery. It hasn't been reported yet whether he'll be missing the entire season, but I think it looks likely. And I'm not an Aaron Rodgers guy, so I think that's the last I should say about that.
At minimum, he's out the rest of the fantasy season, I would assume.
At minimum, at best, you might be getting him back at the end of the fantasy playoffs. He's not worth holding. So, frankly, Aaron Rodgers is a guy that you could drop now. I would cut bait with him in all but dynasty or keeper leagues if you had good value on him. But should you pick up Brett Hundley? To me, I appreciate the question, Todd, but I just don't think so. He's throwing picks left and right after he comes in. He's a really talented guy out of UCLA, but he just doesn't look ready for action. Next week, he's actually up against a defense that might make for a viable streaming candidate in the New Orleans Saints. They will not be scoring 3 touchdowns a weekend again, but they'll be going up against not a rookie, obviously, but a young guy who's unfamiliar with NFL regular season action, and I think that you can look to the Saints as a streaming option, and that you should not look to pick up Brett Hundley in all but deeper dynasty leagues.
Yeah,
that's my 2 cents there.
For me, I would say it's a wait and see. I wouldn't jump on picking him up, but see what he's got the next couple of weeks and maybe make a move.
And a downgrade to all the Packers' weapons. They have running game going now, but still.
Yeah, so that actually goes right into, we have one more question. Paul Saminsky of Grand Rapids. Thanks, Paul, for writing in. What should I do with my Packers weapons that I have? He doesn't say which ones, but let's just say maybe a Cobb and a Montgomery or something. And also, he says, how do you rank Adrian Peterson the rest of the season?
Well, hope he has Adrian Peterson. Maybe he's looking to trade for him. But Paul, what I would say that you do with all of the Packers' offensive players, downgrade them. I mean, you're going from an MVP, perennial Pro Bowler, future Hall of Fame quarterback to a guy who's unproven. Even Jordy Nelson, I think, suffers from this one. The one Packers offensive weapon that I think you could see benefit from this, strangely enough, would be Martellus Bennett. I think that you've got this guy coming in who might rely a little bit on his tight end as a safety blanket, but I think you downgrade them and you try selling if you can. If you can get 85 to 90 cents on the dollar for these weapons, post Aaron Rodgers, you do so. It'll be tough to do so. So maybe you try packaging a guy like Jordy Nelson with somebody else and returning something based on the name value. Speaking of name value, he's asking how I rank Adrian Peterson the rest of the way. I don't know how you feel about this, but Adrian Peterson looked like Adrian Peterson, and I think that the rest of the way, he's an RB2 with low-end RB1 upside. I mean, he really gives a big boost to the Arizona Cardinals offense. I think for them, it puts them right back on the playoff picture map. But yeah, for me, I think Adrian Peterson is a guy that you're not going to not start him after what you just saw. He's a guy that you're going to plug in there and play, and until you hear more about David Johnson, Adrian Peterson is a guy that could help a lot of struggling fantasy teams looking for running back help to make their push.
Yeah, and it seems like the Cardinals will love to, establish a run to set up their pass. They like to go deep, Bruce Arians. So I think some good advice there. Some buy low, sell high candidates. Who do you think you should target and who you should trade away this week?
Well, we just touched on the Packers, so let's just start there. I just mentioned Jordy Nelson. Rodgers out for the season. Like I said, if you can cut bait with him, do so. A couple of guys here that you're going to wonder maybe why they're making it into this segment, but just hear me out. Todd Gurley. For me, I still really do like him as this is why it's weird that we're putting him up here. But if you check out his schedule the rest of the way, I think his best numbers may be behind him, especially from a consistent production standpoint. And so if you can sell him at a price that's based on his early season production, meaning, you basically get, slightly less than that plus another player. Maybe you get Devontae Freeman and something else, and a viable wide receiver like Jarvis Landry. I might be looking to do that because I think that Gurley's schedule is tough enough where even though I still view him as a top 5 running back, if you can slide back just a little bit at the running back position and add another commodity that helps your team, Todd Gurley to me is just a guy that you might still be able to sell really high. Demaryius Thomas, this is probably just a little bit of personal bias. I've just not been a DT guy ever since he began trending in the brick-handed direction with Peyton Manning in his last season. He got a little banged up last night. I don't like the way the Broncos look, and so after he saw 14 targets last night, I just have a feeling it might start going back toward Emmanuel Sanders. That game script certainly didn't help the Broncos. So for me, he's a guy I'm looking to sell. And then Chris Thompson. Looks like to people, who have him, I'm really happy. Chris Thompson went bananas again. But what they don't really recognize, if they're just going based on the fantasy points, is that he had 16 carries for a grand total of 33 yards. He's not going to get the work, even if Robert Kelly is out. He's not going to get that starter workload again because he showed he just couldn't do anything with it. It was miserable. I think Chris Thompson starts to go back into the flex conversation, and he may start to fade a little bit off of that map if Jamison Crowder starts to produce more. So for me, if you can sell Chris Thompson, do so, especially in standard scoring leagues. As far as buys, you'll be happy about this one, Mikey B, but Julio Jones, he's my number one buy. If you can buy Julio Jones for even a little bit less than where he went. You said yourself he was a top 5 selection. If you can get him maybe closer to the lower, end of the first round, maybe on into the second round, it's definitely worth doing so. He will see more red zone targets. Otherwise, heads will roll in Atlanta, and people want to keep their jobs. Adrian Peterson, we talked about him. I don't see any end in sight to his path to continued running back 2 value with upside. The dude's still got it. Dez Bryant, we talked about him a little bit earlier, but outside of week 3 versus the Arizona Cardinals, in that game, obviously, he was against the top corner in the league, and Patrick Peterson, he's had at least 8 targets a game. He's got a pretty good rest of the way schedule. For me, Dez Bryant makes for a good buy. We're going to touch on Amari Cooper again. Obviously, you got to think about it this way. Amari Cooper was drafted in either the second or the third round of fantasy drafts this year in almost any format. I'd say right now, based on what he's done, you could maybe get him at a 10th to 12th round price. For me, it's worth it because if the Raiders don't start getting him involved, they're on a losing slide. If they're looking at themselves in the mirror. What can we do better? And it's got to be, we got to get Amari Cooper and Marshawn Lynch more involved, or we're just not going to be in the playoff conversation. So for me, jump on Amari Cooper if you can.
Awesome stuff. Well, thanks again for watching. I'm Mikey B. Marky J, why don't you tell people how they can find you?
Yeah, you can hop on over to my blog at fantasyfirmblog.wordpress.com and always over on Twitter at MJ Fantasy Sports. It's been a pleasure being with you guys.
All right, guys, good luck, and we'll see you next week.
Week 8.